Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So I have finally achieved this goal. It's been many months in the making, lots of testing, iteration, more testing, failure, more testing, to finally get to the point where I can say that I have produced a high-level Sand Devil guide. Now, in my case, it's actually pure coincidence that I happened to finalize this team right after they finished or released this new update where you can re-roll the Ascension stats on your gear. And for those who don't know, it's posted here in the news tab, but essentially all the Ascension bonuses on accessories and artifacts can be reworked in an unlimited number of times. But each time it will cost more of the currency, so Chaos Dust for artifacts and Chaos Powder for accessories. And each subsequent attempt will increase the cost of the respective currency, up until the 7th time, and then it won't increase anymore, but it will still cost that same value for every subsequent reroll. But again, you can reroll it unlimited number of times, so if you do have enough of the currency, you can, with time and RNG, get the perfect stat on every single piece, but it's going to take some time to do that. Now, some people did have a problem with the fact that these currencies can only be obtained in stage 25, or the highest level of each of those respective dungeons, but I think you have to level set this a bit here, because both of these dungeons are meant to be endgame content. There's no point trying to ascend your artifacts and accessories if you don't really have enough artifacts and accessories to be worth upgrading in that way. And so for a majority of the player base who are still in the early mid game progressing into the late game, you really should be focusing more on the primary core dungeons, making sure that you have gear, because gear is more important than ascending the few pieces you might have. And so while I can empathize with the potential difficulty of being able to progress all the way out to stage 25 and then farm it in a reasonable manner, I do think that by the time you should be worrying about ascending your artifact and accessories, you will have enough of a roster, a big enough roster, to have the champions to develop a late stage Sand Devil and/or a Shogun's Grove team. So now let's go ahead and hop over to the Sand Devil's Necropolis and take a look at the team that we have to showcase for today. I always like to give credit where credit is due, so I will say that I was completely inspired by Bronco Raid Shadow Legends, a fellow content creator, who came up with this team as far as I'm aware. I think he featured Tomb Lord instead of Gomlock here, who we'll talk about the roles in a second here, but slight variation on his comp, but he nonetheless is the one who I saw this originally from, and so I'll leave a link to his video on this topic in the description box down below. So this team is quite complex and nuanced, so we're going to go over the roles as well as what it exactly is going to happen during the fight. But first, let's talk about who does what on this team. So we have a Revive on Death champion here in Maruka, and needs to be on a 4-turn cooldown. That is mandatory because the Sand Devil will do his big AoE, A4, let's call it, on a 4-turn cooldown. So we have to be in perfect sync with that so that we have Revive on Death whenever he does that, so our team can come back alive. We have Woad Painted, who's going to be our primary healer, so you will need a healer because Revive on Death brings you back with 30% HP, so you need some way to not be 30% HP when the Sand Devil takes his next turn. We also have a debuffer in a slot, and this could be anyone, but they do need to have a decreased defense and or weaken on a 4-turn cooldown. Again, we're trying to keep everything in sync with a 4-turn cooldown to stay in phase with the boss. After that, we have a DPS, and in this case, of course, Newt is probably the most optimal because he does have Blessed Bash on a 4-turn cooldown, but again, the DPS needs to have their enemy max HP damage or whatever ability they have on a 4-turn cooldown. And lastly, we have a block debuffs champion, and this can be on a 3 or a 4-turn cooldown. 4-turn cooldown is optimal, again, to stay in phase with the boss, but a 3-turn cooldown block debuffs can work if the champion also has some other ability on a 4-turn cooldown. So in this case, we do have Tutura Raimide, who does have another ability on a 4-turn cooldown with his block debuffs on a 3-turn cooldown. And for those who don't know, the way ability queuing works for a champion such as Tutura, who I will call a 4-3-1-1 champion, which means that he'll lead off with the 4-turn cooldown ability, follow that up with a 3-turn cooldown ability, and then he'll take 2 A1s. The interesting thing that happens for champions like this who are 4-3-1-1 is that after the second A1, both of their cooldown abilities, the 3-turn and the 4-turn cooldown, come off of cooldown at the same time. But since the abilities are prioritized into the 4-3-1-1 order, that means that effectively the 3-turn cooldown ability happens every 4 turns anyways, because they come off at the same time and you're prioritizing the 4-turn cooldown. So like I said, this team is fairly nuanced in the way that it needs to run, so I'm going to go over the AI overrides because they are important, as well as talk about some of the speeds of the champions. Again, this is tuned for stage 25. So the top of the order is Maruka here, or your Revive on Death champion, who you do want to be at least 270 speed. That is the speed of the boss at stage 25, and you need her to go first, or whoever that champion is, you need them to go first so they can put Revive on Death on all allies, and then you can take his big smack and come back to life. So once again, she is the top of the order, so she puts up Revive on Death, everyone dies. She comes back up, she takes the first turn, and she goes right into her A2, which is a single target heal. And so that is good because the single target heal when all things are equal, which is the case after Revive on Death, because everyone comes back with the same level of HP, not the same amount, the same percentage of HP. So this will automatically go to the lead, which is a beautiful segue to Woad Painted. So again, everyone comes back alive with 30% HP. Maruka heals the lead, which in this case is Woad Painted. Unfortunately, no aura, but that just helps the comp run effectively. That is important. Woad Painted must be in the lead position for this to work, but it heals her by 50% of her HP. So she comes out around 80%, plus masteries, maybe 85 or something like that. And then she comes in importantly with her A2. She removes all debuffs from herself, which she won't have any, but she heals herself by 100% of her max HP. So in my case, I have her at like 80,000 HP, so she's going to heal herself by 82,000. And then she heals all allies by equal to half of the surplus heal. So remember that she should be somewhere around 80, 85 HP or percentage HP, and then she heals 100%. And so there's 15 to heal her to full HP, and then all of that excess, half of that heals everyone else. So everyone else gets around a 30,000, 40,000-ish heal, as we'll kind of see. And then one thing to note here that's very, very crucial, everyone else is booked enough, at least to use their abilities on the 4-turn or 3-turn cooldown that is desired. But Woad Painted, you do want her completely unbooked because this is on a 5-turn cooldown, but it grants an extra turn after she does the heal, and so it's effectively a 4-turn cooldown. And then again, we have another ability here on a 4-turn cooldown. You do want to force her to do this because the other thing that does matter for high level Stand Devil is that you can only hit him 5 times. So you do want to keep track of the amount of hits if you're making substitutions for different champions in this composition. So to expound on that a little bit, remember that Maruka is applying 2 abilities that do not attack. So we're at 0 when she takes both of her turns, and then Woad Painted will do this ability here, which does not attack, but she will attack 1 time on the A3 here. So that will be a total of 1 hit on the boss. And there's 4 hits remaining before he wakes up. And we do want to wake him up. That is on purpose for the success of this comp. After that, you do have a debuff for Go. And in this case, I chose Gomlock Skyhide because he is a Doom Tower hard champion, which means that if you play long enough and you're working on Doom Tower hard secret rooms, you will eventually get Gomlock Skyhide. And if you're going for Ramontu Drake's Blood, you have to summon him anyways. So he's going to be on your account, particularly if you're going towards progressing in the end game. So the only thing to note here is that this ability here, like I mentioned, is on a 4-turn cooldown when booked, decreased defense, and when he's full HP, he can also place a weaken, which may not happen after the first cycle just because it's hard to get him back to full HP. But if you can manage to do that with a more robust Woad Painted than mine, you might be able to take advantage of both of those. Also, of course, you can see that he is 5-star awakened. I definitely got lucky. So another reason why I wanted to work him into this specific composition is because we have the protected Brimstone from the 5-star, meaning that there's a 60% chance to land it, but it cannot be cleansed when the Sand Devil does his cleansing ability. More notably for Gomlock specifically, we do not want to use his A2 for the chance of stealing turn meter. It doesn't really matter regardless because Sand Devil is going to be awake by the time we get to this ability, but it's just safer to not worry about reducing turn meter and just go in with the A1. As far as the number of hits, note that Gomlock Skyhide specifically attacks twice, so we are now at a total of 3 hits, as opposed to the original Bronco comp where he had Tomb Lord in this spot who does not attack when he places decreased defense and decreased attack, meaning that we'd still be at the 1 hit from Woad Painted. So there is a slight difference, and we'll talk about why that matters in a bit. But we come to Newt after that, so he comes in with the big A3 here with the triple hitter, max HP. So we definitely want that prioritized. We don't really need the A2 in this instance, and you can use the A1 afterward because again, it doesn't really matter. You can't reduce the Sand Devil's turn meter when he is awake. Now, as I just hinted at, of course, tracking the number of hits, you'll realize that we went from 3 to a triple hitter, which means we're at 6, meaning that the Sand Devil will be woken up by this point, which is a distinct difference when comparing this to the OG Bronco comp, where by this point, Newt will have done 3 hits and making it up to 4, and then Tatura would be the last one to come in and wake him up. For stage 25, that's not necessarily a problem, but later on I'll touch on why that might be a problem for lower stages. So Tatura, to finish off the rotation, he does lead off with the A4. 1, it's an attack just to ensure that we do get all of the hits. In the original comp, he is the 5th hit in the original Bronco comp in order to wake up the boss, which again is mandatory. But also we get the benefit of placing Perfect Veil, which for those who don't know, it reduces the amount of damage you take from AoE damage, which is good. And then it also delays his other ability by 1 turn, which is effectively on a 4-turn cooldown for the reason we talked about earlier, but this places block debuffs up, which prevents the Sand Devil from placing decreased speed and decreased accuracy on your team. So that is the core of the starting rotation for all of the champions on the team. We'll see the rest of the rotations and abilities when we actually run the composition. But before we get to that, I do want to address the elephant in the room that a lot of people probably have that question of how on earth do I get from a low level of Sand Devil to a high level of Sand Devil? And for that, I will first shamelessly plug that I do have a low level Sand Devil guide on my channel. You could check it up in the card above, and it specifically features stage 7 and 11, back when that used to be the most efficient stages for getting the lowest level of oil, or the lowest tier of oil. Stage 25 is now the best because they reworked it a little bit, so I'm not entirely sure what stage on a low level is the best or most efficient to farm, but nonetheless, that video still stands. But for that progression between the low level and the high level that like we're showcasing today, I think the most important thing to realize is that if you're progressing through stages, you can most certainly manual compositions to get them done. So regardless of what team you're running, if you have a Godseeker Neri and you have some companion champion with her, you can simply just run the runs on manual and make sure that you're using the abilities when you need to, make sure that things are happening when they need to. You don't have to necessarily, you can still speed tune it for stage 25 and it might not work on auto for lower stages, but again, you can step in manual and make sure that everyone's using their abilities at the right time, because you only have to progress through the stages once, so it's really worth it to just sit down for however long it takes and make sure that you can get through the runs. On top of Godseeker Neri, there are also some compositions that have solo teams for some of the lower stages, so someone in regen who can just apply burns and stuff and deal with that and heal themselves in some way, shape, or form. That can also work to get you up to a certain point. If you want to switch over to using some sort of Revive on Death AoE champion, all you have to do, again on manual, is just make sure that before the Sand Devil uses the A4, you just have Revive on Death up on your team. And then after that, still manual, you can just go in, use your debuffer, use your DPS, do all that stuff, heal up, just on manual. You're not going to fall in sync with certain speeds for lower stages. But just make sure that you're using the abilities at the right time on manual, and you can still progress through the stages. And as a matter of fact, that is what I did while testing other versions of this composition to make sure to try and see if I can make them work, and just kind of completing stages as I went along until I hit a roadblock. Then I had to rework things in order to progress further all the way out to stage 25. One special thing to note though for the Revive on Death AoE teams is that you do need to be at a stage that's high enough where the Sand Devil will actually kill your team, even if he weak hits with the AoE Revive on Death. Otherwise, you're not necessarily going to have all of your champions going in the right turn order, because if they survive, the return meter is still there versus everyone who died, stuff like that. So you have to be at a high enough stage, and that depends on the tankiness of your champions, the robustness of your gear, etc., on where he will actually kill your entire team every single time, or at least that one time when you're trying to progress through that stage. So keep that in mind for the AoE Revive on Death variations. So a team like this can most certainly work on lower stages, even full manual, to make sure that you're using the abilities at the right time. But again, if they're too tanky, which you do want them tanky for this level of Sand Devil, because he does hit hard in between the big AoEs regardless, you might not have your team die like I described earlier. So just pay attention to that depending on the tankiness of your exact team if you run a composition like this to progress. So let's go ahead and run this team as I talk about a couple more nuances specific to this particular composition compared to the OG Bronco comp. Now, the first thing I want to say is that this team specifically will only work with these speeds, or at least around these speeds on stage 23 through 25. And that is because the boss needs to take a turn while he is asleep, and he is just not fast enough relative to the speed of my champions in this composition to do that on stage, say, 21 to 22. So what I ended up doing for that, or I guess the problem there to highlight a bit more specifically, is that Tatura, the last champion to go, was because in this composition, Newt does wake up the boss, as we talked about, and he was getting skipped because the Sand Devil's turn meter wasn't resetting by taking a turn. And so Tatura was actually missing 2 turns instead of just missing 1, and thus he was always perpetually behind, and he couldn't get his abilities off at the right time. And so what I did to fix that problem on manual was I actually swapped his spot for Pythion, another fusion champion. And so I was able to use a champion who could do block debuffs on a 3-turn cooldown, but it needed to be a cleanse because the Sand Devil will have taken 2 turns after the AoE, meaning that he does place decreased speed and decreased accuracy. So it does need to be a cleanser who can do that. But again, placing block debuffs, or cleansing and placing block debuffs was the key to fixing that composition on manual to make me able to progress all the way out to stage 25. So if we jump back into the current run here, you can see that we're kind of running through, you can kind of see how the abilities work. We got the Brimstone to land that time. We're getting our big slams in with Newt. We're protecting the team. With Woad, you can see the big heal. I guess we'll wait till we see a fresh cycle in case you guys were listening to me drone on here instead. But there's Tortura placing the block debuffs, increased defense, which again is very imperative for keeping everyone alive and keeping the decreased speed, decreased accuracy off the team. Increased defense obviously helps as well. It just gives us a little bit more tankiness so that he doesn't kill us with the couple of AoEs in between. And then after this turn here of the Sand Devil is where we will replace Revive on Death on the rest of the team, so that when he does the big AoE here, which is coming up in a few seconds, we all come back to life, and then we'll get to see the big heals from Maruka and Woad Painted as well. So after that, I'll just skip to the end so you guys can see how long this run took, and yeah, we'll evaluate it from there. So there's the big heals, there's the big heal, there's the first hit from Woad Painted, there's the double hit from Gomlock, and then the triple hit from Newt, which does wake up the boss. Tortura cuts in right there, places the veil, and once again we are in sync. All right, so here we are at the end of the run with a success rate, and you can see here that we pretty much have the exact same time as the couple of test runs, so about 3.5 minutes for this particular composition. And of course the damage is split between Gomlock and Newt. All of Gomlock's damage is predominantly the Brimstone proc, again 5-star Awakened, which is a definite bonus almost on this composition. And we'll talk about substitutions for this role as well, and then Newt of course doing the enemy max HP being the primary source of damage for the comp. Also, if you were curious on how much healing there was on the team behind me, you can see that Woad Painted did a whopping 1.3 million in heals, so pretty solid use of her on this composition as well. Now, as far as time spent in the dungeon is concerned, there are most certainly faster teams featuring Godseeker and Eerie, duo type compositions or solo type compositions that have like Bazaar and stuff like that. So if that is what you prefer to do, then by all means do it, but I personally do prefer 5-man teams if I can swing it, so this team is perfect for me, and it's still pretty quick. It's in that range of 3 to 4 minutes, which is where I like predominantly, well, that's like the highest I like my dungeon teams to take as far as time. So now let's talk about the gear on this specific champion so that you guys understand a little bit more of why this team works and why it's successful. So let's start off with our debuffer, Gomlock Skyhide, and this is endgame content, I will reiterate that. And so in some cases, such as this one, there are specific sets that are mandatory for the success of the composition. So in this case, my Gomlock is in regen and perception, and that is unfortunately mandatory, the regen set, because he is neutral affinity on stage 25, meaning that he can take crit hits, so he is susceptible to taking a lot more damage. Therefore, you do really want him to heal in between whenever he takes a turn. And just having immortal sets is most certainly not enough healing, which I had the displeasure of proving myself through various levels of testing. So if we take a look at his total stats, he is a support champion, so 58,000 on the HP, 3,300 on the defense, so extremely tanky, and even then he was still dying in the immortal sets. 253 on the speed, not necessarily imperative to be this fast, but again, you do want to be at least close to 270 because that's the speed of the boss. Only one champion, the Revive on Death champion, needs to be above 270, but everyone else you kind of want to be slower, but in that band, somewhere between, I want to say 240 and 250. On top of that, we do have 572 accuracy. You do need somewhere around 530 to be able to land debuffs on Sand Devil 25. So you do need to be you do need to have a relatively high accuracy build on the champion. Now, of course, we are helped out in this case because I do have a 5-star blessing of Brimstone, where we do get the bonus of 50 accuracy as well as the protected smite. And then also, if we look at the masteries, you can see here that we are coming down to Eagle Eye. So that's giving us another 50 accuracy on top of our stats. Also, some other debuff for masteries on the support tree. And then going down, picking up as much tankiness stats as possible, or tankiness masteries as possible on the defense tree. So extra defense here, less damage from AoEs, a little bit more healing from whatever sets he has on, and as well as other champions healing him. Delay death. You take 6% less damage by the time you stack up all the hits from the same boss, which is useful in this case. And then also a good one to have, which is Shadow Heal, because every time the Sand Devil does his ability after the big AoE, he heals himself a little bit, meaning that everyone on the team who has this mastery will get 6% healing, so a little bit of a double immortal set. You can think of it that way. Most notably, also, we are skipping anything that boosts turn meter because we do want this team to go in a specific order every time. So think of it like a Demon Lord Clan Boss team, where you don't want to affect the turn order of your champions. Next up, we have Newt, our resident DPS, and I have mine built in a destroy set, but that's predominantly for Scarab King on my account, which is one of the primary bosses I farm. You can definitely put him in anything. However, again, because of the speed tune nature of this composition, you cannot really have him in Relentless or Reflex. So if that is your build, you're going to have to change it to be something else in order to make him not use his ability, his A3, at the wrong time, or with Relentless run out of his buffs at the wrong time. So Newt is built fairly tanky, but more so to maximize the damage from his enemy max HP hit. So just under 40,000 on the HP, 4.3k on the defense, 252 on the speed, just barely slower than Gomlock, as you can note there. Full crit rate, 200 crit damage, and then 352 accuracy. That is set for the Scarab King, so Doom Tower hard levels of accuracy. I do not currently have a blessing on him, but I would probably go Brimstone if I had the choice, but I might have to evaluate that because I also do use him on Hydra teams, and I don't want to stack that team out with too much Brimstone necessarily. On the Masteries, you can see they are unfinished, so it is not mandatory that you have them in this composition. In this particular speed tune, because Newt is the one who wakes him up, it is not a problem if you do have Giant Slayer on him. It might be an issue if you're running the OG comp with the Tomb Lord, because that's not necessarily designed to have Newt be the one to wake up the boss. But with this specific team, having Giant Slayer on will not affect the success of the run, because he's going to wake him up regardless. But that is where I plan to go, as well as picking up some of the other hugging the left side of the offense tree. And then I'm probably going to end on Master Hexer. Although really, I don't really need the T5s, because everywhere that I use him, I don't use his A2 at all, which is the weaken. And obviously, Master Hexer can't extend the duration of freezes. Sniper doesn't affect the A1. You'd have to have fearsome presence, but he has a 100% chance anyways. So I digress. So I might not actually go all the way out to the T5 on the support tree. I definitely will come down to Lore of Steel. Probably the same thing as Gomlock, get charged focus, as well as Swarm Smiter, focusing on the things that boost accuracy, but do not affect his turn meter, because again, we want to preserve their turn order. Next up, we have Maruka, who is our AoE Revive on Death champion, as well as a secondary healer, and she does also kind of need to be in a regen set. You might be able to get away with Immortal on her because she is just inherently a tankier champion, being defense based, but again, same problem as Gomlock, or I guess a worse problem relative to Gomlock, is that she is weak affinity on stage 25, so she is even more prone to critical hits. So you really do want to be able to tank her up to make sure, or allow her to heal in between abilities, just so that she doesn't end up dying prematurely. But again, she is tankier than him, as we'll see here. So 57,000 on the HP, 4.1k on the defense, 271 on the speed. Again, you do need to be faster or at or above 270 in order to take your turn before the boss kills your entire team. And luckily for her, we don't need her to do any debuffs or anything like that. So you just put her in a regen set with some speed, and you can ignore resistance and accuracy for her specifically. I do not have a blessing on her either. I'm not sure what I would choose. There's no aura lead on this team, so intimidating presence, or was it commanding presence, or whatever the second one is. Yeah, commanding presence wouldn't really do anything, but it would give her some bonus stats. Maybe miracle heal, but Mode Painted takes care of that, which, as we'll discuss in a second. So we don't really need the destroying or restoring the destroyed max HP. But regardless, having her have more tanky stats with some sort of blessing, if you happen to get her soul, wouldn't be a bad thing. More defense and more HP. As you can see on the masteries, they are unfinished, and that was somewhat on purpose, somewhat on accident. I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to end up, but finally that I got the team to work, I would most certainly go down to Elixir of Life, just to give her more HP. She's in a regen set, so more HP means she just heals more every time, and she has more HP for the boss to hit into, making her more survivable. So that's the way I would go through Lasting Gifts, and I would probably come down to Retribution if I really needed it. But counterattacking doesn't really help in this fight, because again, the main DPS is between Gomlock's Brimstone and Newt doing his enemy max HP hit. Next up, we have Woad Painted, our MVP healer on the team, who's in a, what is this? Yes, you guessed it, a curing set. What does it do? It increases the amount of healing by 20%, and it also restores destroyed max HP. Now, that part is redundant on this particular composition, because we are healing while the boss is asleep, which already restores destroyed max HP, but consider that Woad Painted heals by 100% of her max HP, which again we'll see is around 80-something thousand. So if she's healing by that much, that means 20% of that is added on top, which is a substantial heal for her. So a curing set is really, really good. And then I happen to be able to pair that with a two-piece protection set, so I get a little bit of bonus HP as well on top of that. So for a grand total of 82,000 health, 2,600 on the defense, 258 on the speed. She does need to be faster than the debuffers, or at least ideally she'd be faster than the debuffer on your team. So going after Maruka, or your Revive on Death champion. And then once again, we don't care about accuracy or resistance. She doesn't really place any debuffs that, one, can land, or two, are imperative for the success of this run. Once again, there is no blessing on her, but if I had the choice for her, I would definitely go Miracle Heal. Again, not because she needs it, because the Sand Devil is asleep when she does her healing, but also it would just give bonus stats of HP, which more HP on her is more healing, which means the team is more survivable overall. So it's just as best as possible to get as much HP on her as you can. And in light of that, you can see that her masteries are identical to Maruka's at the time of this recording, at least. And so I will be definitely going down to Elixir of Life. Again, I was undecided because I was still in the testing phase of this team and I didn't exactly know what each of the champions needed. I was still changing around their gear sets and whatnot. So after all of the testing, I will definitely go towards Elixir of Life for the same reason. More healing from her, more HP, or more HP on her is more healing. And again, I might skip the T5s or come down to Retribution. Not really that imperative for the success of the run. And last up, we have Tatura Rhymehyde, the tank MVP of the team. And you can see that I have him in a Guardian set as well as a 2-piece protection set. If we look at his total stats, you can see that he is at 54,000 on the HP, 4.4k on the defense, 243 on the speed. So he is on purpose the slowest on the team. And then we didn't care about resistance or accuracy. He doesn't need to place any debuffs or resist any debuffs. But I do want to note here that you may have noticed in the run that he might have gotten low a couple of times. And partially that's because there's a lot of 12s on his gear. So his defense isn't maxed out because this chest, I'm just in silver broke at the moment, so I couldn't afford to max it out. But this is missing a lot of defense from this ability, that piece of gear. His helmet isn't maxed out as far as giving me the most flat HP. Neither is his amulet or his banner. So he's missing somewhere around 4,000 HP and then maybe a couple hundred defense from this. So he will be more tanky by the time I actually max out all of his gear. So don't worry, that's not necessarily going to be detrimental to the success of the comp. However, you are being a little bit more risky if you do choose to go with a Guardian set. You can also just put him in normal gear, normal whatever, it doesn't really matter, a couple of mortal sets. He is a really tanky champion and he's positive affinity, meaning he also has the possibility to get weak hit by the boss. So you don't necessarily have to worry about putting him in regen. Blessings on him, probably not imperative because we're not really depending on him to land Brimstone. But if he was your only Brimstone champion, then technically you would want to build him with 530 plus accuracy in order to land that on his one turn that he gets while the boss is awake. For the blessing, I don't have anything on him and I don't really know what I would choose because Brimstone, it's not really going to help because he doesn't have the accuracy to land it. And also on this composition, he goes after the boss is awake, therefore he wouldn't be able to land anything anyways. And for the masteries, you can see that it is unfinished. I was undecided because again, I was testing out this composition, but where I think I'm going to go, at least I want to test it out, is to actually come down to get Bulwark to just make him take more damage on behalf of the enemy team, because Gomlock dying was one of the concerns that I've had. And so switching Gomlock into regen definitely helped with that, at least made it a consistently successful run. But just in case of, a couple back-to-back crits or something like that, I was hoping to get Bulwark. But I am concerned about Tatura dying from taking too much damage, so I'm going to see where his HP levels sit after I max out all of his gear pieces, and then I'll decide if I really want to go to Bulwark, or if I want to tank him up as well and go with Iron Skin and or Elixir of Life. I will probably drop off the offense tree, so I do need to redo his masteries, but I have a free reset, so don't have to worry about that. So the last thing I want to talk about is potential substitutions for the members of this particular team. And again, giving credit where credit is due, I will shout out Bronco, Raid Shadow Legends, who does have a ton of videos showcasing different variations on this team, some of which we'll talk about as far as champions are concerned. So starting off with the Revive Undeath champions in the Sacred Order, we do have a Void Epic, who I do not have, by the name of Lightsworn, who does have AoE Revive on Death on a 4-turn cooldown. Unfortunately, he also does have increased defense, but you don't really get to take advantage of that because you typically use this ability right before the Sin Devil kills your entire team, so it's kind of a moot point. I will note here that you do want to make sure that he does not follow up the turn because he will be the fastest champion in the composition with the A3. You don't want to waste 3 hits on the Sin Devil, so you need to make sure that he follows up with the A2. I'm not certain because I haven't tested it myself. I literally don't have him. I'm not sure if you do build him with accuracy, if placing decreased speed will affect the speed tuning of the boss relative to your team, so that might be a problem. So I'll refer to Bronco's videos, or refer you to Bronco's videos to check out the compositions featuring Lightsworn to make sure that, or to see if you do want to build him with accuracy or not. The second champion to highlight in this vein with Revive on Death is Crimson Helm from the Dark Elves, which is everyone's favorite full manual Bommel experience. I also do not have her, so I couldn't test her out either, but she does have, again, Revive on Death, increased defense on a 4-turn cooldown, which definitely works. For her, the opposite of Lightsworn, you definitely want to turn off this ability here, which is four attacks at random, which will all go to the Sand Devil and basically wake him up prematurely. You don't want to do that, so make sure that you follow up or turn this ability off so that she goes in with the A1 and just hits once. While we're here, one big caveat here while I'm harping on the number of hits is whatever substitutions you choose to make on this team, make sure that you are accounting for the number of hits, because you do need to add up to 5 in order to wake up the boss. That is mandatory for success of the run, but you also want to make sure that you don't wake him up too early depending on the champions you have and the turn order and whatnot. So always keep that in mind. Whoever you're swapping in, make sure that they're doing their abilities at the right time to make sure that you're not doing things too early or too late. The last champion to talk about is in the Barbarians, and that is Skytouch Shaman, another Void Epic, who does have it on a 4-turn cooldown here, Revive on Death and block debuffs. Once again, you typically use this before the Sandova kills your team, so you don't get to take credit for the block debuffs, but there are a couple of nuances with Skytouch specifically. One, she does have the healing passive here, which is a blessing and a curse. So she heals your team based on how much HP she has lost, and it can be a massive substantial heal when she starts to get low. So she can be the healer and Revive on Death champion for your team, but you have to run her in immunity so that she doesn't fear herself at the very beginning. After that, you do have a block debuff champion who will block it or block her from fearing herself afterward. But on the first turn, in order to not have a 50-50 chance of failing the run, you will have to run her in immunity set, so you don't get the benefit of running her in regen, for example, if you wanted to counteract the fact that in order to heal, she sacrifices 10% of her max HP every turn. So in order to make her work, and she was one of the people that I was testing when I was trying to work up a variation, you do have to pair her with a champion who has a heal, single target heal on a 2-turn cooldown. A 4-turn cooldown I tried is too long. She takes too many turns in between and starts killing herself, and then the Sandova kills her or finishes her off. So you will need a 2-turn cooldown heal on a single target. I believe you'd need to run her in the lead position to ensure that the heal goes there, but regardless, it should probably go there because she will be the lowest HP. But again, you need someone who heals single target on a 2-turn cooldown, which is very niche and specific, but there are 2 champions in the game who can do that, one being Apothecary, the most accessible rare or popular rare that you probably have from your early game days. But again, he is magic affinity, so he is the weak affinity relative to the boss, so he's again prone to critical hits, and he's also the least tanky option. And so you probably would have to run him in regen if you wanted to make that work, just so he can keep himself healed and not waste the heal on himself. And then the other option would be Chancellor Yasmin, who is neutral affinity, so still a similar problem. You probably have to run her in some healing sets as well, but perhaps you might be able to handle it a bit better because she is going to be tankier than Apothecary. But nonetheless, the point is that one of those champions would need to heal a Skytouch Shaman so that she doesn't die in the middle of the run, and that is something I haven't tested personally. I tried it with Apothecary, and Apothecary was dying, but I didn't want to put him in regen just to see that through. So that is more of a theoretical comp that it could work with Skytouch Shaman. But as I say, a lot of the times I am a free-to-play player. I'm just a player like the rest of you guys, so I don't have the resources necessarily to work out all of these comps and test them out without burning through my own personal resources, maxing champions and whatnot. So here I will add that I do think the Maruka and Woad Painting combination is probably the best and most efficient way to deal with Revive on Death and healing, aside from potential Skytouch Shaman comps. But nonetheless, if you do want to swap out the healer role, you do need some AoE heal on a 4-turn cooldown, and for that I'll point you to Ugo, Rector Drath, and Runekeeper Dashdark. We can just pick one at random, let's say Runekeeper, because they basically all do the same thing. On a 4-turn cooldown, they have a big AoE heal that's proportional to their max HP, so you build them with a lot of HP, potentially in regen depending on affinity. I guess for all of them you probably want them in regen because they're either a weak affinity or neutral affinity, so you need to be able to heal them up and make sure that they can heal the amount team, but also stack them with as much HP as possible. And again, manage the number of hits on their A1s or their A2s, whatever the other ability is they're going to be using. And like for the case of Runekeeper Dashdark specifically, you definitely don't want him to use his A2 because we do not want to fill a turn meter. We don't want to affect the order of our abilities in the run. Now the debuffer slot is where things get a little bit interesting. Obviously, I've mentioned from the OG comp, there is a Tomb Lord, which is a pretty good choice, although you don't get Brimstone because he won't attack during his placing of decreased defense and decreased attack, but nonetheless, it'll still work in the comp. It'll just take potentially one more cycle because you require New to take 4 turns or 4 instances of Blessed Bash to add up to 10 or 100% enemy max HP because of the 10% cap. But another cool one to mention, Gomlock, of course, who featured in this team. But another cool one to mention is Undead Hordes, Suzerain Catone. who is not the most ideal champion, but nonetheless he can do the job on a 4-turn cooldown when booked. He does have a 100% chance of placing weaken, and then he also has a 60% or 75% chance of placing decreased defense. So 75% of the time he might place both of them, which just means that Newt gets the damage maximized. But I'm not sure if weaken alone, depending on the crit damage on your Newt, will be enough to hit the 10% cap every time. So he may not be the best option, but he also has the possibility of having Brimstone if you're lucky enough to get him up to 5 stars. So that is why he's worthy of mention. Another legendary that has this sort of capability on a 4-turn cooldown right next to them in the Dark Elves is actually Ghostborn, who has this cool ability here, AoE decreased defense on a 4-turn cooldown, but the decreased defense cannot be resisted. So you don't necessarily have to build him with accuracy in order to make him function. However, if he is your Brimstone champion and you only have it at 5 stars, you will need accuracy to be able to land that version of Brimstone. But if you do get lucky enough to have him at 6 stars, then he doesn't need any accuracy to land Brimstone either, and thus you don't need any accuracy in his build for this specific team in and of itself. And believe it or not, there are actually some epics that can kind of fit into this slot as well, so worry not if you don't have those legendaries. I don't have most of them either. The first one to talk about is actually Fodbor the Bard, which some of you might be using in Faction Wars, so he can be purposed for this as well. No access to Brimstone, unfortunately, because they are epics, but nonetheless, when booked, he does have AoE decreased defense on a 4-turn cooldown. However, he is an attack-based champion with a horrible level of base defense, so in order to make him tanky enough to survive, you probably are going to have to run him in regen just to keep him alive on top of the other members of the team. But he is positive affinity, meaning he has the possibility to be weak hit, so that does help in your favor, but nonetheless you do want to make him relatively tanky, and regen might be a necessity. And the last one to mention, believe it or not, is actually from the Dark Elves as well, and you guessed it, it is Madame Saris. Now obviously most people will build her for teams in the arena, but nonetheless if you do have a spare or a backup, or you really would just want to use her in this composition, she does have the same ability as Tomb Lord, where it's a 0 contact or 0 hit AoE, decreased defense, and decreased attack. So that can definitely work. You would probably have to run her in regen as well because she is neutral affinity, therefore she can be critically hit, but she is a support, therefore she can be built very, very tanky. So regen might not be mandatory depending on the stats you can get on her, but nonetheless she is another champion who is capable of debuffing on a 4-turn cooldown. Now generally speaking, the DPS slot on this team could be filled by anyone who has an enemy max HP hit on a 4-turn cooldown, so Cold Heart would technically be able to work. However, considering that we're depending on the cycling of the abilities over time, and it would take a lot longer to get 10 single target hits versus 3 hitters, it's probably better if you have that type, or if you only have that type of champion, you don't have a Newt, for example, on your team, you're probably better off building a different variation of a Sand Devil team featuring Godseeker Neri and some sort of HP burn activator or something like that. So that's my recommendation, but if you do have a Newt, then this team is definitely available and probably one of the better options out there, depending on your roster and blessings and all that stuff. The last spot to talk about is, of course, the block debuffs champion. So there's a couple that I found that have it on a 4-turn cooldown, which again is mandatory. The first being Glacea Soul Guide, unfortunately a legendary, but she does have this AoE freeze, which doesn't matter, but she can place block debuffs on your team for 2 turns. Now, for her to work, this is important. You will need her to turn off, or you will need to turn off the A2 because she will prioritize this, or because she's a 4-3-1-1 champion, but the block debuffs in this case is on a 4-turn cooldown, so you want to make sure that she's using this every 4 turns, and you don't really need the AoE weaken anyways. And then you just need to open with the A1. So her first turn does need to be the A1 just to delay, just like Demon Lord Clan Boss, we need to delay an ability by a turn. So delay the turn, delay a turn for block debuffs to be on a 4-turn quota, and then she'll fall in sync with the rest of the team. But the downside of using her, if you wanted to use her, is that she does not offer any protection like Datura does with increased defense, and you're just susceptible to whatever the boss happens to hit you guys. Hit your team with. So she's not the best option, on top of being neutral affinity again, so she's prone to crits, so you might have to run her in regen, and ideally you don't have a team that is five people in regen, so keep that in mind. She is very, very tanky though, being defense based, high base defense, can't speak today, high base defense and high base HP. The other one that I found that can do this job is actually a Void Epic, so similar affinity problem, neutral, so you might have to run him in regen depending on how tanky you can make him. But Scathix, believe it or not, same problem, or same issue as Glacea, where it's a 4-turn cooldown on the A3 that has the block debuffs ability, but it is a cleanse and it does provide a shield that is 20% of his max HP. So if you do build him with a decent amount of HP, that shield can offer a little bit of protection from the subsequent AoEs from the boss. However, you use this ability after the Sand Devil does his healing ability, which is arguably one of the harder hitting aspects of it, aside from the one that kills your entire team, of course. So you might still be SOL for that ability there, or for his A3, where he cleanses himself and hits hits harder depending on the number of debuffs not on him, or however you want to think of that. So you're kind of susceptible to that one, but afterward you'd be pretty protected with the block debuffs and the shield from the decreased speed, decreased accuracy. Again, turn off the A2 because it's on a 3-turn cooldown, and then you'd want to open with the A1 to once again force the delay on the A3 by 1 turn. All right, so that's going to do it for today's video discussing a high-level team for the Sand Devil. Hopefully you guys found this helpful and there was not too much detail and or too little detail, but if you do have any questions on this composition or any variations, once again I'll refer you to the originator of this composition, Brocco Rachel Legends. Be sure to check out his channel or leave a comment down below asking your question. I can get to it as well, as much as I can respond to for variations on this team. Once again, I will mention that the secret or the key to progressing between low level and high level Sand Devil is to just take over manually and do the runs just like you did potentially with your first core dungeon stage progression. So take over, do it manual, either with a team like this or some Godseeker Neri variant or solo variant. Do it on manual, get through the stage, do it once, win it out, and then you can move on to the next stage. And eventually you'll get to where you can do stage 25. Best of luck with your progression and happy re-rolling on all of your ascended gear. As usual, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.